Good evening, and thank you for tuning in. I'm David Levine. I'm co-chairman of Science Writers in New York. Behind the scenes, like the Wizard of Oz, is my co-chair, Joe Bonner, who produces this and then puts it on YouTube and also puts it on the website. My guest tonight is Josh Fischman, who's a senior editor at Scientific American, who leads coverage of medicine and of science policy from Washington, D.C. His work has been selected for the Best American Science Writing 2012 anthology, and he's won the Blakesley Award for Excellence in Medical Reporting and other writing awards. He's written cover stories for National Geographic, U.S. News and World Report, and features for Time Magazine and the LA Times. As an editor, Josh has been fortunate to work on many stories that have won top journalism prizes. He was editor-in-chief of Earth Magazine and deputy editor-in-chief of Chemical and Engineering News. Okay, Josh, could you turn your video on and your microphone on? And we can start. Hi, thank you.
Hi, David.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good.
So we talked. Oh, it's my pleasure. And I mean, I've written for Scientific American, and and I realize you're like one of the main people I haven't, had on. So I'm very happy to do that.
I'm a relative newbie. I've only been working there 7 years.
Okay, relatively newbie, yeah. But Scientific American is 175 years old.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you made some news, which I know science magazines don't always like making news, but when you endorsed Joe Biden for president, and you said you were one of the leaders of that decision. So I'd like to ask you about
that. Sure. Yeah. I wrote that editorial with the help of thousands of my colleagues.
Okay. And it made news because you've never endorsed anyone before for office.
That's right. Yeah. I frankly was surprised by how much news it made. I thought it would get a little bit of attention, but I didn't expect it to make the New York Times and the Washington Post and all the network evening news and CNN and every major paper overseas. It was kind of crazy, but crazy in a good way.
And I think that led to other, like I know the New England Journal of Medicine also endorsed Biden and a few others. So,
yeah, I don't know if it led to it, but I think we were first out of the gate. Yeah.
Okay. So was there any backlash against this?
Not really.
Okay.
There's kind of the usual social media grumbling, and whenever you do something that is slightly out of the ordinary at a publication, my experience is you always get a couple of letters saying, this is horrible, cancel my subscription. And we got a couple of those, but we also got about 3,000 requests for new subscriptions in the week after we published it. If people were voting with their wallets, it was a winner.
Good. So when was the first story on COVID-19 published by you? And did you ever dream that you'd be working on COVID-19 for the last year? I didn't dream it. Other people, everyone I interviewed said, well, we thought it'd be a month or two, but no. So.
Yeah, I definitely didn't dream it. In fact, I think the first story that we published was probably a small item in early February saying, worrisome respiratory illness in the area of Wuhan, China. And I remember I was actually at a AAAS meeting in Seattle in 2020. Meeting colleagues, friends, interviewing people, doing my job. And Seattle, if you remember, was one of the early spots where the disease was starting to spread in the US. And we were all walking around and going to happy hours, and we never thought that within 3 weeks we would be home from our offices, and our offices would be shut down and would still be shut down 14 months later. No, it was like nobody at the time envisioned it. And when it happened in March, it happened very, very quickly.
So your offices are located in New York City, and the mayor today announced that July 1st, New York City is going to be 100% open. So does that mean you're going back to work?
Well, I'm based in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And Washington, D.C. is not going to be 100% open, but our New York office is not going to be 100% open either. Or I should say, nobody's going to be required to show up in the office, either down here in DC or in New York, or at our parent company is Springer Nature, and they have offices around the world. And the company policy is very cautious and follow the science. And we've been very lucky to be able to do our jobs remotely. And our plan is that we're going to keep on doing that if that's what people are comfortable doing.
Okay, so let's talk. So you're a magazine as opposed to New York Times, Wall Street Journal, which is doing daily reporting, breaking news, although you can do breaking news on your website.
Correct, and we do.
Right. And you do. So what were some of the biggest surprises you did, and what are you really proud of that you did?
About covering COVID?
Yeah.
I think that in our June print issue and in late April online, we pulled together an entire special package of reporting on the COVID outbreak and on the coronavirus.
This year or last year?
Right, a year ago,
Okay.
2020.
Okay.
And that had a whole series of articles, which you can find now online, attributed to our June 2020 issue. And it started out with a look at the beginnings of the viral outbreak and at SARS-CoV-2, written by a really terrific writer, Jane Chu, who is based in Beijing. And she was able to get in contact with some of the Chinese virologists who were tracking the original outbreak, like Xijing Li. And that was the first really strong bit of substantial reporting of the science from the Chinese side. And I'm really glad that we ran that. That was a good eye-opening story, because these scientists happen to be some of the same scientists that identified the original SARS virus, the original coronavirus. And we also took looks at the race to develop a vaccine and the race to develop medicine, and a look at how the pandemic might end. So for me, that was a kind of a high water mark. I think that we put our best foot forward there.
Okay, so do you have reporters in India?
We have a freelancer in India And I should say that the way we work is with a small editorial staff and a large network of freelancers. So that's pretty much how we've been covering COVID, is by relying on a bunch of really good freelance writers. And we're always looking for more.
Okay. Noted by our audience, people listening in. For those listening in, if you have questions for Josh, please put them in the Q&A box. Don't put them in the chat box, and we will get to them. And I already see we have one. So I have a few more questions I want to ask you. So what's been the biggest challenge for you? You have a small staff, you're using freelancers, and the story has political implications, it has medical implications, it has societal, it has racial inequality. So it's a lot to cover. And it's a balancing act. And we talked yesterday how you and I I've been doing this for a year. I'm kind of tired, you know, and you said you are too. And so how do you balance it, and how do you choose which stories to do and which stories not to do? And, or is it breaking news?
It's a good question, David. I think the answer to how I balance it is imperfectly, but by trying really hard. And I'm really lucky that I am partnered with our medical news editor, Tiny Lewis, and so we're kind of a duo, and she does an amazing job of keeping up with daily or breaking news as well as longer term stuff. I'm kind of in awe of her ability to multitask. And we just try and pick our spots. We understand that there are very large news organizations with big newsrooms who are covering what the CDC just said 3 hours ago. And we don't really need to do that because there are very good reporters who are writing that story. So we try and look at stories from a more analytic perspective, not this just happened, this just in, but this is what it means. This is how you should think about it going forward. This is what's likely going to happen. And we try and kind of bring that sort of deeper analysis to our stories.
So, okay, I was thinking about this. So, in terms of government officials, under the Trump administration, I found I couldn't get anyone from the Trump administration to come on and talk to me. I am going to get someone from the NIH in a couple of weeks to talk to me, but he still has to get clearance. Mm-hmm. What is it? Have things gotten easier for you to speak to government officials since Biden has become president?
Yes.
And who are you talking to?
Okay. We're talking to Tony Fauci.
Okay.
We're talking to various officials at the CDC who were just not talking to anyone last year. I think, this is sort of an interesting area that you're getting into. There's been a general concern on the part of science journalists that people who work at government science agencies have been on a short leash for a long time preceding the Trump administration. And you have to jump through a fair number of bureaucratic hoops in order to talk to somebody at NIH. But it's been possible. One of the things that Scientific American does is we also have scientists as writers for us, as authors. So, for example, last January 2020, I had Stephanie Devaney, who's a geneticist at NIH and one of the leaders of their All of Us precision medicine project, write a story for me on that project, and she was able to do it, but she did need to get clearance. So I think that a lot of journalists have wanted greater access to government scientists for a long time, and are continuing to push for that, but also understanding, particularly now that people in infectious diseases have, like they're not sleeping. I'm tired, you're tired, they're really tired. And so you got to respect the fact that they've got real jobs to do. But I'm impressed by the amount of time that infectious disease specialists and public health specialists are able to give to reporters like myself and Tanya and other publications, and are willing to communicate, and they actually seem interested in communicating. They're just strapped for time.
So I have a question I'm going to take. Hi, David and Josh. Thank you so much for hosting this event. I'm tuning in from the UK, so it's about 12:17 there, midnight, and have a question that may be a little out of place. I'm a newbie in freelance journalism and have a number of ideas for analytical pieces, but literally no clue how I can source experts for analytical pieces. Any suggestions? That's for you.
Sure. I think that depending on the subject area, what you want to do is you want to look at the scientific literature to start with and find out who has published a lot and recently on whatever topic you are planning on writing on. And you can find that out by searching public databases, like PubMed is a good one. And you can also look at research university faculty and see if anybody specializes in those areas. And AAAS's press release service, Eureka Alert, also has its own bank of experts that you can look at and take kind of a critical eye to that. What are your thoughts, David?
Well, I agree with everything you say. I also find there's Help a Reporter out, or HARO, and you can just say, I'm writing the story, I need an expert. I also will, I will call the CDC or I'll call the NIH and just reach out to a public information officer and just say, I'm looking for an expert on this. When I was doing that for a while at Cornell, I needed an expert in infectious disease. And, if you call the doctor's office directly, you're just they think you want to make an appointment. So, I had the PIO, just the public information officer, find me someone, and that was really good. So I think people are interested in getting work. So editor's name are listed on your site, but not their contact information. But your guidelines say to pitch the relevant editor. So how do we reach a specific editor to pitch?
That is a great question, and we should fix that.
Okay.
And thanks for pointing that out. So at Scientific American, our email addresses are good ways of reaching us, and there's a format. So we're all blankety blank at SCIAM.com. And the blankety blank part is first initial last name. So I'm J Fischman, JFISCHMAN at SCIAM.com. The editor-in-chief, Laura Helmuth, is L Helmuth at SCIAM.com, and just kind of go on down the masthead, take the first initial, marry it to the last name, and do at SCIAM.com, and you can email us.
Okay, but are you also going to fix the website?
Oh yeah, tomorrow, definitely.
Okay.
Get right on that.
That'll be easier. That'll be easier. And do you get back to people?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
There's also a, I think there's a general inbox called editors@sciam.com, and our staff does look at pitches that come into that inbox. I think that going down the masthead and doing what I said with the individual names of the editors is probably a better use of your time and a better way to get in touch with us.
Okay. Okay. So new journalists are always told to build a relationship with editors. How can I do this without bugging the editor too much?
So Gideon Gill, who's executive editor at Stat, and I gave a presentation at an NASW meeting on this a couple of years ago. And I think we both made the point that we really like freelance writers, and we really need them. And we're not doing our job if we're not responsive. So if you reach out to us, it may take, depending on like how crazy it is that week, a couple of hours or a couple of days for us to get back. I usually get back and say, gee, I'm sorry, it's taken me a day to respond to your note. Give me another day and I'll read it more carefully. And then I do get back. And then we just go from there. That's your relationship building.
So Gideon's been a guest on this show, and he's a friend of mine from NASW, National Association of Science Writers, as well as Association of Healthcare Journalists. And I pitched him. Didn't hear anything. 2 weeks ago, I said, what's the problem? We're friends. And he said, oh, he said, I totally forgot. I'm so sorry. So that happens. So do a follow-up. Don't do a follow-up every hour, but you can do a follow-up with something because things do fall.
Yeah,
cracks.
Give it a week. If it's time sensitive, don't wait a week. Put the words time sensitive in the subject line of your email. Sometimes that helps. But yeah, sometimes stuff gets buried in your inbox, and sorry about that. We try, and we're imperfect, but we're well-meaning.
Okay, me too. I actually was supposed to interview someone this week, and I kind of lost track because there was a 400-page book which I just got yesterday, and I just said I think I have to postpone. I'm fast, but not that fast.
Yeah.
So hi, I'm Ling Exene. I hope I'm writing it. I've written 4 pieces for Simon about physics and space, and my collaboration with my editor Clara has been fantastic. I wonder how you decide which stories go into the print version. All my stories are published online. I'd love to make an effort. Thanks.
That's a really good question. And I'm so glad that you're working with Clara, who is one of my favorite people in the world. And If I was freelance writing, I would definitely be pitching Clara Moskowitz stories. She is a terrific editor, and we kind of have two tracks for stories that we commission. Some are envisioned as for print directly, and others are envisioned as online first, and we'll see if they fit into print. So think of the print magazine as a kind of a curated version of our content. We're a publisher. We have a really robust website. Most of our material is on our website first. And to go into print, it needs to fit into a much smaller package. So we have to be pretty selective. It's a different medium than online. And a lot of the online stories that we do are somewhat time sensitive. So it takes such a long time to produce a print magazine, like a 4-month lead time before our subscribers get it, that we have to be careful and mindful of whether something will appear as old news or as irrelevant or as superseded by by subsequent events. If we decide today that we're going to pick up something from online and put it into an August print issue. So that's basically how we make those kind of calculations and judgments. If it's going into print, we're looking for things that will stand the test of time. We have to.
Okay, I just want to remind people, please put the notes in the chat, in the Q&A box, not the chat, but the same person from England asked, what's the ideal length for a pitch? And I would say short and concise. Don't send a thesis. Don't send the article. But you're the editor, so you're
yeah, that's great advice, David. Don't send the article. Send 3 or 4 paragraphs explaining why our readers are going to really want to know the story that you're telling.
Okay. Okay, so then we're going to go back to other questions which have to do with more of what you're writing about. Are there subject areas you'd like to see more pitches on? And are you also accepting pitches on COVID-19? Or is that already covered?
I think that's kind of the same question.
I agree.
And personally, I would like to see pitches on other parts of biomedicine than COVID-19. I would like to be able to do other, cover other parts of medicine besides COVID-19, but that's just like the biggest science story of my lifetime. So that's what we're doing, but there's room for other stuff, and it's important to cover other stuff. So, please, if you've got some, great story about a new approach to cancer therapy, I would be very interested in reading that.
So I sometimes do interviews with book authors also, which is kind of how I started. And last week, I said, this is great because there's nothing about COVID in this interview. We did one on leprosy. That was pretty I think she was the lead writer for NPR.
Mhm.
So Lydia Denworth, who I know and you know, says, "Hi, Josh. What do you think is the most important COVID story right now?"
Hi, Lydia. How COVID manifests as stuttering. That's sorry. Lydia is working on some stuttering stories. I think that the most important story, more seriously, right now uh, is how humans are responding to the virus, both sociologically and immunologically. I think that there's, that a lot of what is happening with this pandemic has to do with human behavior. Um, and I think that covering that and the debates about how to stem infections with human behavior is really, really important. I also think that immunologically, there's been some absolutely fascinating and amazing research done on how the immune system responds to not only the original dominant wild type form of SARS-CoV-2, but the emerging variants. And that's going to have a big effect on whether we need to modify the vaccines that are rolling out. And like we still don't have a handle on that. That's emerging and really fascinating science.
So here's a question, which I don't know. I didn't know you did this. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. Could you tell us a few stories about being the masters of ceremony on stages at the USA Science and Engineering Festival, please? It sounds like fun. Sounds like a lot of fun. Any surprises over the years?
Well, there were some explosions on stage. This
First,
is a
first tell us what this event is.
Yeah. So this is this giant STEM festival that used to occur in the before times every other year at the Washington, D.C. Convention Center. And it had it had just floors and halls chock filled with different events and expositions, and grade school kids and college kids running all over the place, and exhibitors ranging from Microsoft to Lockheed Martin to the Pentagon, all showing off, the various science and technology projects. And let's see, and so I said, explosions. I was MC on a stage where there were some chemistry demonstrations going on, and this was planned, but it was still pretty noisy. As often happens with chemistry, things go bang. And these were some balloons that filled up very rapidly with gases that were heated. And excuse me, that was kind of fun. Excited a lot of the kids in the audience. And then I think we had a National Forest Service dancing mascot, who was not a bear, but some other large mammal. I can't recall. That was kind of interesting. And he had cheerleaders that came with him. But it really is you had to be there to enjoy it, and it really helps if you're a kid or the parent of a kid. I don't have a lot of like great hysterical hijinks stories about it, but it is an event that is is really great for stirring up enthusiasm about science. And I'm lucky that they asked me to host a stage there. And I would do it again if it happens again.
There are a few science comics, and I'm thinking maybe I should do a panel with them one day.
Yeah.
Like one of them works for NASA, Kash Patel, so I'm going to try and reach out to her. Because she's done some stand-up at AAAS meetings. This is from Estrella Burgos, who's an editor in Mexico, and who I've written for. And she sends me the articles I've written, and they're in Spanish. And I say, it looks fine to me, because I don't know Spanish. How do you keep up with new software and trends for online publishing?
Slowly.
Okay. Okay.
We we try and have technology that allows us to present science communication in the best possible way for our viewers and our readers. So, we're constantly evaluating products and software that let us do that. A lot of that work falls to our art department, which is very remarkably and spectacularly led by our design director, Michael Marak, who knows a lot about this stuff. Jennifer Christensen, our senior graphics editor, is a wizard at presentation technology. Our lead website developer, Ryan Reed, keeps an eye on this and is trying to test new ways of and new bits of development for software that lets us do different things on our website. So it's it's an ongoing process, and you also have to have stability in your platform as well. You can't constantly be shifting from one thing to the next, because you'll break the site, and this new GWiz thing that you'll try turns out not to work with something that you were using to present photographs with, that you put up, that you established on the site from 5 years ago. And that's a bad thing, because we like photographs. We think they're really good. We want viewers to see them. So, it's test, develop, don't move too fast, don't break things. But, try and allow for some of the most exciting technological developments like animations. I should mention our audio and video editor, Jeffrey Delvicio, who also is driving a lot of the technology that we use.
Okay. So editors often say they want studies they haven't seen before, which makes sense and can be difficult. Short of having personal relationships with university research departments, what are your tips for uncovering stories editors haven't seen? I kind of know that. I think you do, but I'll let you answer that.
So you put on your reporter hat and you develop sources. Somebody earlier had asked, how you like source stories. So find, read journals. Understand that if something is in a big journal like Science and Nature and Cell, editors like me are probably going to be aware of it. But you can, by going to conferences, now virtually, used to be going in person, you can usually get to talk to the scientists who are doing the research before they've gotten it accepted in one of those journals. And if you form a nice relationship with them, you can get them to tip you off when it's going to be published. And And that's a good way of covering breaking news.
Well, I would also, I have two suggestions. I have registered with Eureka Alert for their embargoed press releases. So you kind of know what's, this is before they've been published. So you can pitch an editor, and I mean, editors, get them also, but doesn't mean they always want to do it. I attended the American Academy of Neurology meeting virtually, and there were embargoed abstracts, which means these articles have not been published yet. They're they're abstracts or they're poster sessions, but sometimes there are very interesting stories that may lead to something. And once the conference goes live, you can read them and you can pitch them. And you can pitch them actually before the conference goes live, but I mean, it's not like you're breaking anything by pitching them to an editor. But I would definitely recommend getting on Eureka Alert and getting on the embargo list, because then you will see stories that have not been published before. And editors, they're busy. They don't read everything.
No, that's definitely true. Yeah. Just because something has a press release doesn't mean that I've read it.
And also doesn't mean that's great. I mean, just because it has a press release. I mean, Ivan Oransky says there are millions of press releases every day, millions of studies published, and
Yep.
doesn't mean it's good. Here's a question: what role do you believe the press has in overcoming vaccine hesitancy? And I just want to say there was an interesting story in the New York Times saying that today that people who are hesitant against the vaccines, they believe in vaccines. They're just, they're not, ridiculously ignorant. They're just skeptical about the government. And it could be people on the right, people on the left, or people who have no party affiliation, which is a pretty interesting story. And that's kind of in line with the Cultural Cognition Project at Yale University, where they've spoken about that too. Because years ago, the measles outbreak was really in California was triggered by parents who were very liberal, who didn't want their kids vaccinated with the measles. And it was a huge measles outbreak and very dangerous. So again, the question is, what role do you believe the press has in overcoming vaccine hesitancy?
Well, I think that, David, you really just hit on the key when you were talking about the measles vaccine. I don't think my role is to champion vaccines or to crusade to overcome vaccine hesitancy. My role is, however, to make sure that readers know what the consequences of vaccine hesitancy are, which is disease. And we've been living for the past 100 years in this very privileged and unusual time. And my friend Maren McKenna, who's also a contributor to Scientific American and a specialist in writing about infectious disease, has pointed this out, that that this was this period between the late 1800s and the early 2000s, where we thought we'd gotten away from infectious disease because of things like the success of vaccines. And it's made everybody very complacent. We're not the first people to observe that. So we've had a couple of episodes where that complacency has been shaken, and we're living in the biggest one right now. So I think that the threat of infectious disease like Zika, like Ebola, and certainly SARS-CoV-2 should make everyone think about what they can do to not get sick and to not spread the disease. And it's pretty clear that vaccines are a really really crucial way of doing that. And you can be hesitant and you can be skeptical, and you should, you know, you should do your own reporting from reliable sources. I happen to think that Scientific American is a reliable source on this topic, and there are plenty of others. I think the CDC is a reliable source on this topic. The New York Times is a reliable source on this topic. I think Facebook is not a reliable source on this topic. But you know, you shouldn't take my word for it. You know, look at those other sources, and make up your own mind. The Kaiser Family Foundation and the Pew Research Organization have done really good studies on people's attitudes towards vaccines, and only a minority of people are hardcore against vaccines and distrustful of them and think that they're dangerous. There are a lot more people who think that vaccines could be a good thing. Vaccines could be our way out of this problem. They're just concerned that the current crop of COVID vaccines were created in a hurry and that there could be some side effects. We've been carefully reporting on the side effects. I think that the vaccine manufacturers have, by and large, been very transparent about what happens after you get the shot. Millions of people have gotten shots. And I think we have a pretty good idea now that these are remarkably safe inoculations and that the risks are pretty small and that the benefits are huge. So it's a risk benefit calculation. I've been vaccinated twice. I was very happy when I got my second shot.
I felt very relieved also, but I'm still cautious. Okay, so last question, then we're going to talk about your podcast, which we said we would. Is there a place in Scientific American for grad students without much writing experience?
Ah,
I mean, that's it. How do you get published when you haven't been published before?
right. So grad students in journalism?
Didn't say.
Well, maybe you can tap back with an elaboration on that question.
Okay.
Where, you know, we're a professional magazine. We try and work with professional writers and reporters, but everybody's got to start someplace. And if you don't have a lot of experience,
this person's a scientist.
Okay. There's a really, sorry, frog in my throat. There's a really good program at the University of Stony Brook, a science communication program for scientists. Just Google it. It's at the Alan Alda Center there. And I think that you should start there because you can get a lot of tips about how to communicate to a popular audience about science.
There's one other thing I might add is that sometimes if you have an expertise in something, it doesn't really matter if you're a great writer because the editors can help you with that. But sometimes, you know, I did something with Stephen Chu, just Nobel Prize winner, and he just said, you know, I don't write op-eds, but we worked on one together, you know. But but that's the exception. You know, I think that's an exception. All right, so tell us about your podcast with Tanya, who's a friend of mine who I was on a press tour at Ben Gurion University in Israel with, and we were there during Israeli election day, so we had a day off and went on a camel ride, and we also went to the Dead Sea in Masada. So tell us about this podcast, because I've seen one or two episodes. And how did this start? And what do you like about doing it?
What I like about doing it is that it's a different way of reaching people, and it's a quick way of bringing people up to date on some important and urgent news about COVID. So the podcast is called COVID Quickly. You can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can also find it on siam.com under podcasts. And every second week, Tanya and I record about 4 to 5 minutes of summaries of stories, some of which are based on our original reporting, some of which are based on reporting of our contributors. And as we say in the podcast, we try and demystify the science and explain what's really going on to you. The last one, which dropped on Friday, if I can put in a plug, that's episode 5, talked about the first real strong data on COVID long haulers, which are people who struggle for months after their initial infection. And it's an important long-term consequence of the disease. We talked about that. We also talked about some data that was published last week in the New England Journal of Medicine on the safety of the COVID vaccines during pregnancy, which fortunately they look quite safe. And Tanya talked about the rarity of the blood clots that have shown up with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So, oh, and you asked how it started. It started early this year when Tanya and I were talking about how we could bring some of these stories to an audience that wasn't, that was kind of on the move. They wanted to listen while they were being mobile on their phones or whatever device of your choice. And we thought a podcast that was very brief in length would be a good way of doing that. And so Jeff Delvicio, our audio podcast editor, helped us a lot every episode. We just went out and made it happen.
Okay. So I like to ask people what they do. So are you doing indoor dining?
No, I am not doing indoor dining. I had my first outdoor dining at a restaurant ever since this started last week. Okay. And that was it was a little weird. I was like, are we really going to do this? Are we really doing this? And it was open air, and it was a sparsely populated patio with a couple of tables, and the data is pretty strong at this point that if you're in the open air and you're reasonably spaced from people and there's a breeze, that your risk of infection is pretty low. So we felt good and had some really good pizza. It was a pizza place.
Okay. I have friends who have been urging me to go to indoor gym, and I'd say, I'm not doing it. And they say, why? I said, because air particles stay in the air. But I do go to museums. Paul often said it's okay to go to museums. So I take him as a trusted source. But indoor dining, I'm not so sure. Then what do you think of the new mask guidelines yesterday?
I thought that they were good.
And they have this funny graph, if you've been vaccinated or haven't been vaccinated, They're like, it kind of look like monkeys, like, monkey see, monkey do, like, so if you haven't been vaccinated, 3 out of 5 times you got to cover up. If you've been if you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, only 1 time you had to cover up.
Yeah, there were a lot of complaints about that graphic.
Yeah.
That it made things look very complicated. And it's we live in complicated times, but it's kind of a matrix. If you're vaccinated, you're safer doing certain things. If you're not vaccinated, you're not as safe doing certain things.
It's also, how do you assess risk? And that's a very, it's, I have people who swear, said, well, my gym is, I know who's going there. And I said, well, you know who's going there when you know who's going there, but you don't know what, or they have bubble. People say, we have a bubble. But I said, well, what happens when they're not in your bubble, and who are they seeing outside the bubble? Because you don't always know that. So.
Yeah, and nobody's going to be walking around with neon signs saying, I have not been within 6 feet of another human being for the past 18 months.
Right.
So, you don't know.
On the other hand, I know someone who didn't go out for the entire year.
Really?
Yeah,
that sounds tough.
I think it's, yeah. I said, you can go for a walk when no one's around. He said, I'm not, no. So, so.
I'm lucky. I live in a suburban neighborhood outside of DC, and I can walk around, and population isn't really dense. And there's a creek and a wooded glade right near my house, and great places to walk. So I've been blessed, and I'm very, very conscious of that. There are people who are in Brooklyn who feel very crowded and very threatened when they go out, and that's tougher. It's this has just been a miserable thing to go through. For a lot of people, a lot more miserable than anything that I've experienced. And
well, last Sunday, I saw my 2 children and 2 of 3 of my grandchildren together for the first time since March 2020. I've seen them separately, but not together. And we were outside at a park. It was great. My one granddaughter's 3, the other is going to be 2. And it was just a wonderful experience. It was just, I can't even, words just fail me. It was just a wonderful, thing to happen. And it was a natural thing that was happening before all this happened.
Yeah, we're social creatures.
Yeah.
Staying away from loved ones is hard.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, this will be my last question. What has been the main challenges of reporting the pandemic? Or what has been your main challenges reporting the pandemic?
I would say finding enough time to kind of take in all of the different bits of information, and then deciding what I have time to actually edit and write about, because I can't do it all. So, it's the challenges have been time and being choosy, and I hope making the right choices. Time will tell, I guess. So, and sleep. Honestly, there are nights where I just start reading some scientific papers, or reading comments from scientists, and kind of go down a rabbit hole find, like trying to figure something out about, remdesivir, which is a potential COVID drug, I would say at this point. It doesn't seem to be hugely successful. Or anything like that, anything having to do with this pandemic. And I'll be up until 4 a.m. trying to figure out whether we could and should report something on this.
Okay. So before I say goodnight, I want to plug, on Tuesday, I'll be interviewing journalists in Europe. It'll be Tuesday, May 4th. Well, it's May or almost. And that will be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because of the time difference. And we have a journalist from France, we have a journalist from Germany, and a journalist from Switzerland. And we're going to be talking about the slow rollout of vaccines in Europe. Because, in the United States, anyone over 16 can get a vaccine. In Europe, I have a friend whose mother is 80 years old and just got her first vaccine last week. So it's quite a difference. So anyway, my guest tonight was Josh Fischman, senior editor of Scientific American magazine, who is tomorrow going to list his email address, and you can email him with all your pitches, and he's going to be cursing me and other editors as well. And thanks. I hope you had fun. I did.
Great. I had a great time. I really appreciate you having me on.
Okay. This is great.
I want to thank everybody for your questions. They're really good.
Yeah, they were. Okay. Good night. And yeah, it was the first time we got a lot of practical questions from the editor. It was good. Thanks. Good night. And everyone stay safe. And I hope you and Tanya will come on one time and maybe even do a little podcast or talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Let's talk about that.
Okay. That'll be great. Okay.
Thanks,
Talk to you
David.
soon. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Night.